This is a multi-agency operation. Since February of this year, we've made over 35 arrests of individuals either using or trafficking heroin here in St. Tammany Parish. Due to the increased use of heroin, which has resulted in several fatal overdoses, mostly here in the Slidell area, we have decided to join forces with the DEA, the Sheriff's Office Task Force, to aggressively combat this issue. We're going to take questions and answer questions that you may have regarding these arrests. These 35 individuals that you see here today have all been arrested with either possession with intent to distribute heroin or both. DEA Special Agent Brown.
Thanks, Chief, for having us here, and thanks for recognizing the problem that heroin is becoming across the state of Louisiana. It is a killer. As the Chief said, the number of overdoses are increasing dramatically. It is a drug that does not discriminate based on race or socioeconomic status or educational status. It is a across-the-board destroyer of lives. And so I'm proud to have the men and women of DEA partner with our friends and colleagues from the Sheriff's Office and from the police departments here to attack this problem, because it's going to take all of us working together, not just in law enforcement, but in educating the community and educating the parents and trying to find some help for some people. So, you know, it's going to take a concentrated and intense effort for us to be successful, but I think we're on our way.
Last year in 2013, we here in Slidell had seven overdoses. We had 7 overdoses as a result of heroin, fatal overdoses, heroin use. Already this year in 2014, we've had 4. The last one being last week, where a young female overdosed on the use of heroin. It's not just a problem in Slidell. It's not just a problem in St. Tammany Parish. This is a national epidemic that we're seeing, and it's increasingly getting worse. So we decided, our partners here today in law enforcement decided to get together, take proactive stance, and start putting these individuals responsible in jail. With that being said, it's not just about putting the heroin addict or dealer in jail. It's working with the local hospitals and our substance abuse clinics here to make sure if somebody's on heroin that they get help, and help is readily available. This drug is highly addictive, and of course the educational process and awareness is what we're also trying to get out to our community. Is serious. We're behind this drug, and we're going to work together to do what we can to better our community.
You know, in the small town of Mandeville, like the Chief said, since January 1st of 2014, we've had 3 overdose heroin deaths in the city of Mandeville. Compounding that, and we were all talking, that a lot of people say, well, how does this affect me? You know, I don't use heroin and so forth. Well, we see a drastic increase in property crimes, for example, that goes along with this. Car burglaries, things like that. People need to feed this habit. And we were talking again earlier that, you know, you're looking at a minimum $100 a day habit, and that's minimum. And it grows from there. So it affects the whole community, not just those that are using and abusing. So again, we're not immune from it, and I'm glad to join forces with all these guys to in this battle we have.
And I apologize for not turning my phone off before. But obviously, guys, the good news here is that we have experience at this type of task force enforcement. And I think both the chiefs and Keith said it best, that we'll come together, make sure we deploy whatever resources are necessary at the national level, the parish or local level, to make sure that we stay ahead of this. Some 17 people overdosed last year on, at least where heroin was involved. And whether or not it's a crisis or an epidemic, we learned from the illegal prescription pills that were out there, deaths will occur if we don't take these things serious. And I think when you look at the problem that has been defined nationally, we certainly don't want to wait until the numbers are staggering before we become proactive. And as a team, I think we can bring a lot of attention and do whatever we can proactively to get parents engaged, the community engaged, do whatever's necessary for public education to say that, as these guys have pointed out, this is a bad drug. We don't want to wait until more of our young people or people die before we respond. So I thank Keith and DEA and the chiefs for everyone coming together and let's getting the message out. But just like the prescription drugs, just like all of the horrible drugs of history, I can promise you that in St. Tammany Parish, we will take care of this one as well. But drugs are cyclical. Something else will come to the surface. And as a team, we'll address it and make sure that we at least do what we can to keep them out of St. Tammany.
And I think that's the key, working together. It's not just the agencies that are represented in the St. Tammany Parish Narcotics Task Force. It's all the agencies across southeast Louisiana working together to try to combat this and continue to combat this problem, which is taking the lives of our young people. It's sad. It's very sad. These aren't the hippie kids from the early '70s doing heroin. These are our kids, your kids, or your grandkids. I've had several parents in here in this office crying over the loss of a loved one who didn't know how to get their child help or got their child help, and 2 or 3 months later wound up getting back on it and dying as a result. So we are taking it serious, and we're doing everything we can together to put a stop to it.
So how would you describe the situation now? So you made all these arrests. You said we're going to stay on top of them. Is it still this epidemic out there? Or is it just a matter of continuing this?
Most of the heroin that we see coming into the Slidell area or to this parish is coming from the South Shore. We know that. And where it's coming from to get to the South Shore, I'll let Agent Brown speak on that. Most of these cases, most of these arrests that you see here today started on the South Shore in Orleans Parish and wound up here in the Slidell area.
I think from a national level, we're seeing the heroin being trafficked along a lot of the same routes you see marijuana and cocaine and methamphetamine, and from Texas into the New Orleans area at a wholesale level, at a multi-kilogram of heroin level. It's then broken down into sort of mid-level distributors, most of whom right now are on the South Shore, but that problem, if we're not aggressive, will expand. And then it's broken down even further into smaller cells and ultimately to the end users, which are scattered across all parts of southeast Louisiana.
Kevin, if I can follow up on that, I agree with Keith 100%, but I do think it would be somewhat of an injustice to describe what we're talking about as this horrible epidemic that's taken over St. Tammany. That's simply not true. 70, almost 80 people died last year in prescription and other overdoses, and respectively some 15 to 17 that at least had heroin in their system. 4 that died strictly because of heroin. So it would be an injustice. I think better said is that we're recognizing it as a team and making sure that one is too many. It's kind of trying to describe whether or not this is a problem or an epidemic. Hurricanes aren't a problem unless they visit your community. Same thing here. Heroin might not be your problem until your son or grandson or daughter, as Chief Smith talked about, is the one sitting in our offices crying because of that loss. And for that purpose, we're committed to it. But again, guys, I think when you look at substance abuse, please recognize that the problem is much larger than just heroin or any individual component. And that's what we're asking, not only locally, but all of us collectively are working at the state level, the Chiefs of Police Association and the Sheriff's Association, trying to get legislation passed because of the seriousness of this particular drug. But make no mistake, if we eradicate this one 100%, tomorrow morning there will be another to take its place. And we hope that the unity of the team speaks much louder than any other individual part of what we're doing.
And the sheriff hit a good point with the prescription drugs. You cannot discuss heroin without discussing prescription drugs. The two are linked. I've been in the police business for over 20 years now. I have never interviewed a heroin addict that did not start with prescription drugs. Yep. And so to try to have them separate is craziness. They're very two sides of the same problem. And so, you know, we've got to be aggressive in controlling the prescription drugs, in making sure they stay for the medical intent that they were prescribed for, because that's where we see a lot of the heroin. Not all prescription drug users obviously go into heroin. Not even all prescription drug abusers go into heroin. But every heroin abuser I've ever met started with prescription drugs. The other interesting thing about it is, at some point, the ones that do go into heroin, they have to find a source for the heroin. There they tend to find it is the source for marijuana. Know somebody. So the sheriff's absolutely right. It is interlinked problems. These problems don't exist in a vacuum, and we have to address them all simultaneously.
You have 35 people, all of them arrested for simple possession or intent to distribute heroin. How much heroin would you say you've taken off the streets of St. Tammany Parish? How much have you confiscated from these 35 arrests?
With this operation, I don't know the weight or the amount right now. Sean, do you have that? Several ounces, and again, this is only the beginning. This is not the end. This is, like I said, this operation began in February and resulted in over 35 arrests. These are the 35 that we brought here today, but there are several others, and this will continue. This operation will continue with the agencies represented here before you.
And we continue to work up the trail. Okay, I mean, obviously, you know, we're seeing some of this heroin has ended here in St. Tammany Parish, but it has a beginning somewhere, and that beginning is a much larger trafficking organization that's crossing international lines, it's crossing state lines, and so we are pursuing that angle aggressively, and there will be more to come on that angle.
You mentioned working with hospitals. Is there help available for the amount of people who right now are addicted to heroin?
Yes, the numbers I gave you earlier that we spoke about were the fatal overdoses that we've experienced. That's not to mention the heroin overdoses that are individuals that have been treated here at our local ERs that were in the process of either dying, they survived, and now looking for help. That's where the substance abuse clinics come in. We're working with them as well. There's several, not several, but there are some throughout our area that are fully aware and that there are people out there that are seeking help. And that's what we're also here to do, not just put everybody in jail. We want to make sure there is help readily available so that they can get the help they need to get off of this highly addictive drug.
And Keith probably is a noted expert at the table, certainly far more than me, but one of the things that I found surprising in the dangers of heroin, other than obvious, one, poppy is not grown in St. Tammany, so it comes in from somewhere else, and Keith and them bring an incredible force to help us and prevent him from coming here. But secondly, from what I learned through all of this, heroin, Keith, an individual could have taken it 3 or 4 times, but the 5th or 6th time is fatal simply because the strength and the mixture has changed, as opposed to being 20% pure, maybe 40, 50. Keith, can you talk about that a little bit?
The purity issues on heroin are one of the reasons we have such high alarming numbers of overdoses across the country. Again, we are starting, you think about the prescription drugs that people take. If you take a 30 milligram oxycodone, you know to a scientific certainty there's 30 milligrams of oxycodone in the tablets you just ingested. So you have a baseline for what works. The problem with heroin is it's made in labs in the jungles of Colombia and in the high desert mountains of western Mexico. And so we have people whose education level probably is middle school or high school, producing a substance in clandestine labs designed not to get caught. Do they know the purity of the substance they produced? Of course not. They know what's worked for them in the past. So you start with an unknown substance of an unknown purity. You then bring it to Louisiana, and someone at a higher end distribution cuts it, adulterates it. And they're doing that not based on trying to arrive at some level of purity, because they don't even care, they don't even test it. It's derived to increase profit. Because if I can take a kilogram of heroin and turn it into a kilogram and a half of heroin, now I've increased my profit margin. Because let's not forget, this is all about, at the upper ends, making money. It's not about an addiction, it's about profit. So it's then sold in the ounce levels, and the same thing happens. So what we see across the country is these wildly different purity levels at the end users. We can have people at the 18%, 20%, 22%, and that's what they're used to, and that's what you're used to, and all of a sudden it's 42%. And they're not likely to survive that. So the purity levels are incredibly important in understanding this. The other thing about purity levels, 9 or 10 years ago, the purity levels were low enough, in the low teens and single digits, that the only way to effectively get high from heroin was to inject it. The game changer became when the heroin purity moved into the 20s. That purity of heroin, you can now get a high by snorting it or smoking it. So the stigma of the needle went away. And so it became much more attractive to a young person who's taken some pills and got high, but they can't find some tonight, to say, oh, I can smoke this, or oh, I can snort this. It becomes much more attractive. So the purities change has changed how we look at heroin, and then the radical differences in purity across the board are one of the things that lead to so many fatal and non-fatal overdoses.
Any explanation for why the deaths have gone up and the apparent use of heroin has gone up so quickly over the last couple of years?
I think what we've studied and what we've seen is that the prescription medication that was more available on a street level is not, and the cost has gone up, and that's the work of the DEA and the FDA that have combated that problem. Now the heroin appears to be readily available and more affordable. So the pills aren't there, so these addicts are now resulting to heroin to get their fix or the drug of choice, and that's something that we've experienced as well.
And let's not forget our stint with bath salts in between those two as well. And we see that declining now. The deaths that occur from bath salts, and whether or not, and we've talked about this, whether or not heroin's resurgence is maybe an old standby, maybe kids heard about it and from history or what have you, but again, something will take this one's place, and that's why the leadership of DEA in so many cases can look at the country and help guide our efforts and our task force associations here on the local level. And prescription pills, remember, much of that debate and circumstances started right here in St. Tammany Parish, where we partnered, again, task force forum, to really take on an industry that had spread nationally, and ultimately brought those people to justice and closed them down. And again, we'll do that with this as well. But we'll have to make sure that parents are vigilant, and that's what I think is most interesting about what Keith talked about. Most people, when they think of drug overdoses, it comes from greed and excess, where a person continues to pump more and more amounts of poison into their system until they die. But this, they don't necessarily have to increase the dosage. It could just be that purity level is higher. And that's what parents, in my mind, should talk about. That's what I've talked about with my 19-year-old daughter. Make sure that you understand, though you've been told 1,000 times these things can kill you, we have a very clear track record, and it's beyond your control. And I would encourage parents and people in the community to talk about that.
I think the sheriff's exactly right. I think convincing people that heroin's dangerous is not hard. I think most people already think that. It's a drug with a great deal of stigma attached. And I think that's why we see so few start with heroin. They start somewhere else. Unfortunately, the prescription drugs don't have that same stigma attached. And across the country, time and time again, we see the same story. The successful high school or college athlete who breaks his arm, and he goes to the doctor and he starts getting prescribed these medications, and nobody's worrying because the doctor prescribed it to him. And nobody's paying attention, and then what everybody has to understand, heroin and these other opiates are remarkably similar in chemistry, okay? People don't understand what a powerful, powerful drug oxycodone is. It's remarkably chemically similar to heroin. It has a lot of the same effects. So what we've got to do as parents is be more concerned about the doctor pulling my wisdom teeth and the doctor giving me 60 hydrocodone, and we're going to take all 60 of them. Why not try 2 or 3